Standing before an ornate mirror in the Grand Aurora Hotel's luxurious bridal suite, I found myself confronting a paradox that would define one of the most important days of my life. The reflection staring back at me was nothing short of breathtaking. A vision in ivory silk, adorned with hand-sewn Parisian crystals that caught and scattered light like captured fragments of starlight. The gown's train cascaded behind me in elegant waves, each fold a testament to 18 months of meticulous planning and a price tag that exceeded what most families considered a reasonable annual income. This was my wedding day, the culmination of years of hard work, careful saving, and dreams that I had nurtured since childhood. Yet something fundamental was missing from this perfect picture. The bridal suite buzzed with love and excitement. My best friend Julia fussed with my cathedral-length veil, tears of joy already streaming down her carefully made-up face. My future mother-in-law, Dorothy, kept finding excuses to squeeze my hand and whisper that everything was absolutely perfect. My bridesmaids, resplendent in their deep burgundy gowns, laughed and captured every moment on their phones, their champagne flutes catching the late October sunlight that poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The room overflowed with warmth, celebration, and genuine happiness. But in the midst of all this joy, there existed a hollow space, a conspicuous absence that no amount of flowers, no perfectly chosen song, no heartfelt toast could fill. My parents were not here. More accurately, my parents had chosen not to be here. And that choice had been deliberate, calculated, and devastatingly final. 3 months earlier, they had drawn a line in the sand, and I had refused to cross it. Now, on what should have been one of the happiest days of my existence, I stood surrounded by love while simultaneously mourning the absence of the two people who should have been at the very center of this celebration. To understand how I arrived at this moment, standing in a designer wedding gown, preparing to marry the love of my life without my parents present, requires understanding the fundamental dynamics that had governed my family for my entire 32 years of existence. I am Cassandra Marie Harrington, the firstborn child of Robert and Margaret Harrington, though you would never discern this fact from observing how my parents allocated their attention, praise, and resources throughout my childhood and into adulthood. My brother Trevor entered the world exactly 26 months after my own arrival, and from the moment he drew his first breath, the entire gravitational center of our family shifted. It was not a subtle transition or a gradual evolution. It was immediate and absolute. Trevor became the sun around which our family solar system orbited, while I was relegated to the role of a distant, easily overlooked planet, expected to maintain my trajectory without requiring fuel, attention, or acknowledgement. The pattern established itself early and repeated with soul-crushing consistency throughout our developmental years. I would bring home a report card populated entirely with A+ grades, having spent countless hours studying and perfecting every assignment. And my mother would glance at it briefly before placing it on the refrigerator with a simple, "Very nice, dear," before returning to whatever she was doing. Trevor would bring home a report card featuring mostly C's with perhaps a single B-, and my parents would celebrate as though he had just been awarded a Rhodes Scholarship. They would take him out for ice cream, call the extended family to share the wonderful news, and remind him constantly how proud they were of his improvement and his effort. This disparity extended into every aspect of our lives. When I expressed interest in learning piano at age 7, my parents enrolled me in group lessons at the local community center. Affordable, impersonal classes where one instructor attempted to teach 15 children simultaneously. When Trevor casually mentioned at age 9 that he might want to try guitar, my parents immediately hired a private instructor who came to our house twice weekly at considerable expense. I practiced diligently for 3 years, eventually reaching an intermediate level of proficiency before my parents quietly stopped paying for the community center classes, claiming budget constraints. Trevor attended exactly 11 private guitar lessons before losing interest entirely, and the expensive acoustic guitar they had purchased for him gathered dust in the hall closet for the next decade. Neither the wasted money nor his lack of follow-through warranted any comment or consequence. The academic disparity proved even more pronounced and had far more significant long-term implications. I was an exceptional student, not through any inherent genius, but through relentless discipline, organization, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. I understood early that academic achievement might be the currency through which I could purchase my parents' approval, so I pursued it with single-minded determination. I graduated as valedictorian of my high school class, having maintained a perfect 4.0 grade average while simultaneously participating in debate club, volunteering at the local hospital, and working a part-time job at a bookstore to save money for college. My parents attended my high school graduation, of course. They sat in the audience and applauded when I delivered the valedictorian speech that I had written and revised 17 times. But there was no graduation party, no special dinner, no acknowledgement that their daughter had achieved something genuinely remarkable. My mother's primary comment afterward was that my speech had run slightly long and that some people in the audience had appeared restless. My father mentioned that he hoped I would be practical about my college choices and not burden them with excessive expenses. I was practical, excessively, painfully practical. I applied for every scholarship available, spending my entire senior year filling out applications and writing essays. I was awarded a partial academic scholarship to a respected state university, and I covered the remaining costs through a combination of student loans and working 2 part-time jobs throughout my undergraduate years. I studied business with a focus on pharmaceutical marketing, a field I had researched extensively and determined offered strong career prospects and financial stability. I graduated summa cum laude with my bachelor's degree and was accepted into a competitive master's program in business administration. My parents gave me a card and a $50 check for my undergraduate graduation. The card featured generic congratulations printed in gold script, and my mother had simply signed both their names without adding any personal message. Trevor's trajectory through higher education could not have been more different. He graduated high school with a 2.7 grade point average, having barely met the minimum requirements. He had no extracurricular activities, no work experience, no particular interests or passions. My parents spent months researching colleges that might accept him, eventually settling on a local community college where admission standards were minimal. They paid his entire tuition, along with his rent, his car insurance, his groceries, and a generous monthly allowance for spending money. Trevor approached college with the same lackadaisical attitude he had applied to everything else in his life. He changed majors 4 times, from business to communications to general studies, and finally to something called entrepreneurial studies that seemed to involve very little actual studying. What should have been a 2-year associate degree stretched into nearly 4 years. My parents never expressed concern about the extended timeline or the multiplying costs. Instead, they praised his journey of self-discovery and his refusal to be confined by traditional expectations. When Trevor finally graduated with his associate degree, an achievement that had required nearly twice the standard time and approximately $40,000 of my parents' money, they threw him an elaborate graduation party. They rented a venue, hired a caterer, invited over 100 people, and displayed poster-sized photographs of Trevor throughout his academic journey. My mother gave a tearful speech about how proud she was of her son for finding his path and never giving up. My father presented him with the keys to a newer used car as a graduation gift. I stood in the corner of that rented venue, drinking cheap champagne and wondering what alternate universe I had stumbled into, where mediocrity warranted such extravagant celebration. Following my graduation with a master's degree in business administration, an achievement I celebrated alone with cheap wine and take-out Chinese food in my studio apartment, I entered the pharmaceutical industry as a junior marketing analyst. The position was entry level, the salary modest, and the hours demanding. But I approached it with the same relentless determination I had applied to my education. I understood implicitly that success in my career would have to be entirely self-generated. There would be no family connections to leverage, no parental financial support to cushion setbacks, no safety net if I failed, so I simply did not allow myself to fail. I worked 60-hour weeks consistently, volunteering for projects that others avoided, studying clinical trial data until I understood it as thoroughly as the physicians conducting the research, and building relationships with doctors, researchers, and industry leaders who could teach me the intricacies of pharmaceutical marketing. Within 2 years, I was promoted to senior analyst. Within 4 years, I was leading my own team. By year 7, at the age of 30, I held the title of Senior Director of Marketing for Cardiovascular Pharmaceuticals at one of the most respected pharmaceutical companies in the country. My career success brought financial stability that would have seemed impossible during my student years. I purchased my own condominium in a desirable Miami neighborhood. I drove a reliable, attractive car that I had saved up to buy outright. I traveled internationally for both work and pleasure. I built an investment portfolio and a comfortable savings account. I lived well, but never ostentatiously, always mindful of the lean years and the uncertainty that had characterized my early 20s. Throughout this period of professional growth, my parents' interest in my life remained minimal and perfunctory. They would ask vague questions during our infrequent phone calls. "How is work? Are you staying busy?" But their eyes would glaze over if I provided any substantive details. My mother once interrupted a story about a successful drug launch I had led to ask if I had heard about Trevor's new business idea. My father fell asleep during a dinner where I was attempting to explain a promotion I had received that came with a significant salary increase and expanded responsibilities. Trevor, meanwhile, bounced from one failed venture to another with astonishing consistency. Following his graduation from community college, he decided to become a personal trainer, despite having no particular fitness expertise or certification. My parents funded a 3-month certification course and helped him purchase equipment. The personal training venture lasted approximately 8 months before Trevor concluded that early morning sessions and demanding clients were not his vibe. Next came a brief stint as a social media consultant, a title he had apparently bestowed upon himself after reading 3 articles about Instagram algorithms. This venture required no formal education, but did require a new laptop, professional camera equipment, and attendance at several expensive marketing conferences, all funded by my parents. Trevor signed exactly 2 clients, managed their social media accounts for approximately 6 weeks each before conflicts arose, and then quietly abandoned this entrepreneurial path. The cryptocurrency consultation phase arrived next, coinciding with the period when digital currencies were receiving massive mainstream media attention. Trevor spent 6 months becoming what he described as deeply knowledgeable about blockchain technology, which primarily seemed to involve watching YouTube videos and participating in online forums. He convinced my parents to invest $5,000 in various cryptocurrencies based on his expert analysis. They lost 70% of that investment when the market crashed. Trevor faced no consequences for this financial disaster. Instead, my parents consoled him for having experienced bad timing and praised him for his willingness to think innovatively. Most recently, Trevor had reinvented himself as a life coach. This career choice was particularly fascinating given that Trevor's own life was characterized by chronic underachievement, financial instability, and an inability to maintain commitments. Nevertheless, my parents enthusiastically supported this new direction, funding the fees for an online life coach certification program that appeared to involve watching videos and completing multiple-choice quizzes. Trevor created a website, printed business cards, and announced his services on social media. As far as I could determine, he had acquired exactly 0 paying clients. Throughout each of these failures, my parents remained unwavering in their support and praise for Trevor. He was entrepreneurial. He was finding his passion. He was unwilling to settle for corporate conformity. The fact that he was 30 years old and had never successfully supported himself financially was never acknowledged as problematic. Meanwhile, my steady career progression, increasing responsibilities, and genuine expertise in a complex field warranted barely a mention during family gatherings. I met Dr. Harrison Mitchell during a pharmaceutical conference in Boston during the autumn when I was 31 years old. My company was showcasing a groundbreaking new cardiac medication that showed exceptional promise in treating certain types of arrhythmias, and I was leading the marketing presentation to an audience of cardiologists, cardiac surgeons, and medical researchers. I had spent weeks preparing the presentation, ensuring that I could speak fluently about both the clinical data and the patient quality of life improvements the medication offered. Harrison attended the presentation and asked several exceptionally insightful questions that demonstrated he had read not just the summary data, but the actual detailed clinical trial results. After the presentation concluded, he approached me and requested my business card, explaining that he wanted to learn more about the medication's applications for his surgical patients. His manner was professional but warm, his questions intelligent and genuinely curious rather than challenging or skeptical. He called me 3 days later and asked if I would be willing to have dinner to discuss the medication's potential interactions with post-surgical protocols. I agreed, assuming this would be a professional working dinner where we would discuss clinical applications, dosing considerations, and patient selection criteria. We did discuss all of those things during the first course. By the time dessert arrived, we were talking about everything else: our childhoods, our career paths, our perspectives on work-life balance, our favorite travel destinations, our thoughts on everything from architecture to philosophy to whether pineapple belongs on pizza. Harrison was unlike anyone I had ever known. He possessed a brilliant medical mind, having completed his cardiac surgery residency at Johns Hopkins and establishing himself as a rising star in his field at only 35 years old. But his intelligence never manifested as arrogance or condescension. He listened more than he spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and had a remarkable ability to make everyone around him feel valued and heard. He was also devastatingly handsome in an understated way. Tall and lean with steady surgeon's hands, dark hair that was perpetually slightly disheveled, and warm brown eyes that seemed to see directly into the core of who you were. But it was not his appearance that captivated me. It was the way he treated people: the servers at the restaurant, the valet attendant, the colleague who interrupted our dinner with an apologetic medical question. He extended the same courtesy and respect to everyone, regardless of their position or their utility to him. We began dating with an ease that felt almost surreal after years of disappointing relationships with men who were either intimidated by my career success or resentful of the time my work demanded. Harrison understood professional ambition because he lived it himself. He never asked me to diminish my careers or questioned why I worked long hours. Instead, he would show up at my office at 9 in the evening with takeout food when he knew I was working on a major deadline, content to sit in my conference room and work on his own surgical notes while I finished presentations. Our relationship progressed naturally and beautifully over the course of 9 months. We traveled together, taking a long weekend in Charleston, where we explored historic neighborhoods and ate exceptional food. We integrated into each other's lives, attending work functions together and meeting each other's friends. Harrison's family, his parents, his younger sister Rebecca, and her husband, welcomed me with immediate and genuine warmth. His mother, Dorothy, took me to lunch within a month of meeting me and told me that she had never seen her son so happy, so completely himself, as he was when he was with me. I introduced Harrison to my parents at a family dinner approximately 5 months into our relationship. I had delayed the introduction, partly due to scheduling challenges, but primarily because some part of me dreaded subjecting Harrison to my family's dynamics. But Harrison wanted to meet them. Believing that understanding my family history would help him understand me more fully, The dinner was exactly as awkward and disappointing as I had anticipated. My parents were polite to Harrison, but spent most of the evening asking him questions about his medical career in a way that felt more like an interrogation than genuine interest. My mother asked 3 times how much cardiac surgeons typically earned and whether his practice was stable. My father wanted to know if Harrison had good malpractice insurance and seemed disappointed when Harrison explained that the hospital covered those policies. Trevor arrived 45 minutes late with Sienna, the woman he had been dating for approximately 3 months. Sienna was 26 years old, perfectly pleasant in an unremarkable way, and spent most of the dinner taking selfies and checking her phone. Trevor dominated the conversation with a lengthy explanation of his newest life coaching philosophy, which apparently involved helping clients manifest abundance through energetic alignment. Harrison listened politely and asked thoughtful questions, trying to find genuine connection points. My parents hung on Trevor's every word as though he were delivering profound philosophical insights rather than reciting buzzwords he had learned from YouTube videos. As Harrison and I drove home that evening, he was quiet for several minutes before finally speaking. "Your family dynamic is challenging." I laughed, though it sounded bitter even to my own ears. That's a diplomatic way of phrasing it. "They don't see you," he continued quietly. "They don't see how exceptional you are, how hard you've worked, what you've built. They're so focused on Trevor that they're completely blind to the fact that their daughter is extraordinary." I felt tears prick my eyes, not because his observation was surprising, but because it was the first time anyone had explicitly named the reality I had lived with for 3 decades. "They never have," I said softly. "I think some part of me has always been trying to do enough, achieve enough, be enough, that they would finally notice. But the goalpost just keeps moving." Harrison reached over and took my hand. "You are enough, Cassandra. You've always been enough. Their inability to see that is their failure, not yours." That conversation, in many ways, marked a turning point in how I viewed my family relationships. Harrison's external perspective gave me permission to acknowledge truths I had been suppressing for years. Harrison proposed to me on a Saturday evening in late November, approximately 11 months after our first date. He had planned the evening with characteristic thoughtfulness, a private dinner at an exceptional restaurant, followed by a walk along Miami Beach under a full moon. As we walked along the shoreline, he stopped, took both my hands in his, and told me that meeting me had fundamentally changed his understanding of what love could be. He said that my strength, intelligence, and compassion inspired him to be a better person every single day. He said that he wanted to spend the rest of his life being my partner, my biggest supporter, and my fellow adventurer through whatever challenges and joys lay ahead. Then he knelt in the sand and presented a ring that took my breath away. A stunning 2-carat diamond in a platinum setting, elegant and timeless. Before he could even finish asking the question, I was saying yes, tears streaming down my face, already pulling him to his feet so I could kiss him. We celebrated that night with champagne and phone calls to the people we loved most. Harrison called his parents, his voice thick with emotion as he told them we were engaged. His mother cried happy tears, and his father insisted we come for dinner the following evening so they could properly celebrate. Harrison's sister Rebecca screamed so loudly that we had to pull the phone away from our ears, and she immediately began offering to help with wedding planning. I called Julia, who also screamed and immediately demanded to know every detail of the proposal. I called my Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, who had always maintained a close relationship with me despite my parents' emotional distance. She was overjoyed and told me she could not wait to see me as a bride. Finally, I called my parents. My mother answered, and I told her excitedly that Harrison had proposed and that I was engaged. There was a pause that lasted just slightly too long before she said, "Well, that's wonderful, dear. Congratulations." Her tone was flat, perfunctory, lacking any genuine enthusiasm. She called my father to the phone, and I repeated the news. He offered his congratulations and said he looked forward to meeting Harrison again, though they had already met months earlier. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. There were no tears of joy, no excited questions about the proposal or the ring, no offers to celebrate together. My mother mentioned that she and my father were watching a television program they wanted to get back to, and we said goodbye. I sat on my couch afterward, staring at the beautiful ring on my finger, and felt the familiar hollow ache of disappointment that had characterized my relationship with my parents for as long as I could remember. Harrison wrapped his arms around me and held me while I cried, mourning not the relationship I had with my parents, but the relationship I had always wished I could have. We hosted an engagement party 6 weeks later at a lovely restaurant in Coral Gables. Harrison's family attended, along with approximately 40 of our closest friends and colleagues. The evening was filled with champagne toasts, laughter, and genuine celebration. My parents arrived exactly on time, stayed for precisely 90 minutes, made polite conversation with several people, and left early claiming they had another commitment. They spent more time talking to Harrison's parents than they spent talking to me. Trevor and Sienna also attended, arriving late and leaving early. Trevor gave a brief toast that consisted primarily of jokes about marriage being the end of freedom that fell flat with our professional adult crowd. Sienna spent most of the evening on her phone, posting Instagram stories with captions like fancy party vibes and champagne life. Despite my family's lackluster participation, the engagement party was wonderful because it was filled with people who genuinely loved and supported us. Harrison's father gave a beautiful toast about gaining a daughter he had always wanted. Julia gave a hilarious speech about our college friendship and how she had known the moment she met Harrison that he was the one. Several of my colleagues from work shared stories about my professional accomplishments and expressed genuine happiness for this new chapter in my life. As the evening wound down and Harrison and I said goodbye to our guests, I realized something important. Family was not merely defined by blood relations and shared genetics. Family was the people who showed up, who celebrated your victories, who supported you through challenges, and who genuinely wanted your happiness. By that definition, the people in that restaurant, with the notable exception of my parents and brother, were more family to me than the people who shared my last name. I threw myself into wedding planning with the same methodical attention to detail I applied to my pharmaceutical marketing campaigns. I created comprehensive spreadsheets tracking every element, venue options with detailed pros and cons, caterer comparisons with cost analyses, photographer portfolios organized by style and price point. This was going to be a spectacular celebration, not because I needed to impress anyone, but because Harrison and I deserved a beautiful beginning to our marriage. We toured a dozen venues before falling in love with the Grand Aurora Hotel's ballroom, a stunning space featuring soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Miami's waterfront, and an elegance that felt both grand and intimate. The venue was expensive, costing significantly more than many couples spent on their entire wedding, but Harrison and I agreed it was perfect. We booked it immediately for October 15th, giving us 10 months to plan every other detail. I selected my bridal party carefully, Julia as my maid of honor, along with 3 other close friends who had been constants in my life through college, graduate school, and my career. Harrison chose his college roommate Patrick as his best man, along with 3 other physicians from his residency program who had become his closest friends. Our bridal party was small, intentional, and comprised entirely of people who had proven their friendship through years of consistent support. The dress shopping experience proved emotional in unexpected ways. Dorothy, Harrison's mother, asked if she could accompany Julia and me to the bridal appointments. She said she had always dreamed of being present when her future daughter-in-law found her wedding dress, and she did not want to overstep but would be honored to participate if I was comfortable with that. I found myself tearing up at her request. This woman who had known me for less than a year was offering the maternal support my own mother had never provided. I invited my mother to join us as well, extending the olive branch despite our strained relationship. She agreed somewhat reluctantly, mentioning that she had a busy schedule but would try to make time. The four of us, Julia, Dorothy, my mother, and I, spent a Saturday visiting Miami's premier bridal boutiques. I tried on approximately 15 gowns before finding the one. The moment the bridal consultant fastened the final button and I turned to face the mirror, I knew. The dress was an ivory silk masterpiece with a fitted bodice covered in hand-sewn Parisian crystals, a flowing A-line skirt, and a cathedral-length train that pooled dramatically behind me. It was elegant without being ostentatious, romantic without being overly ornate, and absolutely perfect. Julia burst into tears the moment she saw me in it. Dorothy clasped her hands to her chest and whispered, "Oh, Cassandra, you look absolutely breathtaking. Harrison is going to lose his mind when he sees you." The bridal consultant was beaming, already reaching for a veil to complete the look. I turned to my mother, wanting her approval, needing some acknowledgement that her daughter looked beautiful. She studied me for a long moment, her expression neutral before finally saying, "It's quite extravagant, isn't it? Do you really need something so expensive? It seems excessive for a single day." The words landed like stones in my chest, each one heavy with implied criticism. Julia's tears stopped abruptly, and she stared at my mother with barely concealed anger. Dorothy's smile faltered, confusion crossing her face. The bridal consultant suddenly became very busy adjusting non-existent wrinkles in the dress. I looked at my reflection one more time, at how the dress made me feel like the best version of myself, and made a decision. "I'm purchasing this dress," I said firmly. "It's perfect and I love it, and I'm not compromising on something this important." My mother pursed her lips but said nothing more. She left the boutique shortly after, claiming she had other commitments. Dorothy stepped in immediately, linking her arm through mine and telling me that she wanted to treat me to the veil as an early wedding gift. She selected a stunning cathedral-length veil with delicate lace edging that complemented the dress perfectly. Julia purchased the beautiful crystal headpiece I had been admiring, insisting that my something sparkly was her gift to me. As we left the bridal boutique that afternoon, dress selected, veil and headpiece purchased, my heart feeling both full and aching, Dorothy pulled me aside. "Cassandra, I want you to know something important. You are joining our family, and we could not be more thrilled or more proud. Whatever your relationship with your parents might be, however complicated that history is, please know that you have a mother now who sees you, who values you, and who is honored to be part of your life." I cried in the parking lot while this woman who had known me for such a short time offered me the maternal love I had craved for 3 decades. Approximately 3 months after Harrison and I announced our engagement, and 7 months before our October wedding, Trevor called me with news. He and Sienna had gotten engaged. They had been dating for less than a year, and the relationship had always seemed casual and somewhat superficial to my observation. But Trevor sounded genuinely excited. He proposed to her at a chain restaurant, Olive Garden specifically, with a ring that looked like it had been purchased at a discount jewelry store. But Trevor was happy, and despite our complicated sibling relationship, some part of me wanted him to experience joy. My parents reacted to Trevor's engagement as though he had just won the Nobel Prize, cured cancer, and been elected president simultaneously. My mother called every relative, friend, and acquaintance to share the wonderful news. My father posted on Facebook for the first time in years to announce his son's engagement. They threw Trevor and Sienna an elaborate engagement party, significantly larger and more expensive than the one Harrison and I had hosted for ourselves, inviting over 150 people to celebrate. I attended the party with Harrison wearing a tasteful cocktail dress and bringing an expensive bottle of champagne as a gift. We congratulated Trevor and Sienna sincerely, and I tried to feel genuinely happy for my brother, despite the obvious disparity in how our parents were treating our respective engagements. Throughout the evening, multiple relatives commented to me quietly about the difference. How my parents had seemed relatively indifferent about my engagement, but were treating Trevor's as the social event of the decade. 2 weeks after Trevor's engagement party, my mother called and suggested we all have dinner together, both engaged couples and my parents, to discuss wedding planning. She said it would be efficient to coordinate since both weddings would be happening within the same general time frame. I agreed, though I felt a vague sense of unease about the proposal. We gathered at my parents' house on a Sunday evening. I had spent the previous 7 months deep in wedding planning and had made significant progress. I showed everyone my carefully organized wedding binder, the venue contract, the caterer selection, the photographer's portfolio, samples of the invitations I had ordered from a custom letterpress company, preliminary versions of the seating chart, fabric swatches for the bridesmaid dresses. I had created a Pinterest board with my color scheme, deep burgundy, gold, and ivory, and had mock-ups of the floral arrangements I wanted. My mother examined all of this with an expression that I could not quite read. My father leafed through the materials without much interest. Trevor looked mildly overwhelmed, and Sienna scrolled through her phone, barely glancing at anything I was showing them. Then my mother asked Trevor and Sienna about their wedding plans. They exchanged glances, and it quickly became clear they had done virtually no planning whatsoever. They had selected a date, December 12th, exactly 8 weeks after my wedding, but had booked no venue, hired no vendors, and made no concrete decisions about anything. Their aesthetic preference was described vaguely as simple and elegant, and their budget was non-existent because they were assuming my parents would cover all costs. My mother nodded thoughtfully as Trevor and Sienna outlined their non-existent plans. Then she turned to me, and I saw something calculating in her expression that made my stomach clench. "Cassandra, dear, I've been thinking. Having 2 elaborate weddings so close together might be excessive for the family. Perhaps you could scale yours back a bit. Make it more intimate, more modest. You're older, more mature. You don't need such an extravagant display." I set down my wine glass very carefully, certain I must have misheard. "Excuse me," my father cleared his throat, joining the conversation. "What your mother means is that 2 expensive weddings in such a short time frame put strain on the whole family. You've always been the practical one, Cassandra. Trevor and Sienna are just starting out. It wouldn't be fair if your wedding overshadowed theirs." The words hung in the air, so absurd that I almost laughed. "I've been engaged for a year. I've been planning for 7 months. I've already booked and paid deposits on everything, and my wedding is 2 full months before Trevor's. How exactly would mine overshadow his?" My mother's expression hardened slightly. "People will compare them. Trevor deserves his moment without that comparison. You have a successful career, a lovely home. You don't need an ostentatious wedding to prove anything. Trevor's wedding should be the family event that everyone remembers." The truth crystallized in that moment with brutal clarity. This was not about logistics, budgets, or family coordination. This was about the fundamental dynamic that had governed my entire life. I was expected to diminish myself so that Trevor could shine brighter by comparison. My accomplishments, my happiness, my dreams were perpetually secondary to my mediocre brother's need for validation. "No," I said simply, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. My mother blinked, clearly not expecting such straightforward refusal. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no. I am not changing my wedding. Not the venue, not the guest list, not the flowers, not the dress, nothing. I have worked incredibly hard to build a career that affords me the ability to have the wedding I want. Harrison and I are paying for everything ourselves. You don't get to demand that I make myself smaller so Trevor feels bigger." The argument that erupted was spectacular in its ugliness. My mother accused me of being selfish, jealous, vindictive, and cruel. She said I had always resented Trevor's natural charisma and that I was trying to punish him for being more likable. My father said I was being ungrateful for everything they had sacrificed for me, conveniently forgetting that I had paid my own way through everything since age 18. He said I was making a mockery of what family meant, that I was choosing pride over relationships. Trevor finally spoke, his voice wheedling and manipulative in a way I recognized from childhood. "Come on, Cassie. You don't really need all that fancy stuff, do you? You're just trying to show off. Can't you just tone it down a little? For me, we're family." I looked at my brother. This 30-year-old man who had never supported himself financially, never completed anything he started, never faced consequences for his irresponsibility, and felt decades of suppressed anger finally break free. "We're family when you need something from me, Trevor. We're family when Mom and Dad want me to sacrifice for you, but we're not family when it comes to celebrating my accomplishments or supporting my happiness. That's not family. That's just convenient manipulation." Sienna, who had been silent throughout the entire argument, chose that moment to post an Instagram story. I saw her phone screen as she typed the caption, "Family dinner drama, LOL. Seeks engaged, C's, wedding planning. T, family is everything." I stood up, gathering my wedding planning materials. Harrison rose beside me, placing a supportive hand on my lower back. "We're leaving. Harrison and I are having the wedding we've planned. You're all invited, though I'm beginning to question why, but I will not change a single detail to accommodate your favoritism or Trevor's lack of planning." My mother's voice followed us to the door. "If you insist on this selfishness, you'll regret it, Cassandra. Family has limits." I turned back to look at her. "You're right. Family does have limits. I'm just now discovering mine." The weeks following that disastrous family dinner passed in tense silence. My parents called repeatedly, but every conversation followed the same exhausting pattern. They would begin with false pleasantness, asking how wedding planning was progressing, then quickly pivot to suggestions that I scale back my plans. They framed it as concern about costs, despite Harrison and I paying for everything. Concern about what people would think, concern about overshadowing Trevor. I refused every time, maintaining firm boundaries despite the emotional toll these conversations extracted. Each phone call left me drained and angry, questioning why I continued to subject myself to their manipulation. 6 weeks before my wedding, my mother called with an edge in her voice I had never heard before. "Cassandra, your father and I have discussed this extensively, and we've reached a decision. If you insist on having this lavish spectacle that you're calling a wedding, we will not attend. We cannot in good conscience support such blatant selfishness and such obvious disregard for your brother's feelings." The words landed with physical force, knocking the breath from my lungs. I sank onto my couch, phone pressed to my ear, unable to formulate a response. My parents were threatening to boycott my wedding because I refused to diminish it for Trevor's benefit. "Are you seriously telling me," I finally managed, my voice shaking, "that you won't come to my wedding because I won't make it smaller? We're telling you that we won't enable your ego and your need for attention. Marriage should be about love and commitment, not about showing off your wealth and making your brother feel inadequate. Perhaps when you're ready to put family first and approach this with appropriate humility, we can revisit the conversation." "I am putting family first," I said, anger replacing shock. "I'm putting the family I'm creating with Harrison first, the family that actually values me." "So that's your final decision? You're choosing pride and materialism over your parents and your brother? You're the ones making that choice, Mom. You're choosing not to attend. I'm simply planning a wedding that Harrison and I want, using money we earned. There's nothing about this that's excessive or inappropriate. You just can't stand that I'm succeeding in ways Trevor never has." "How dare you," my mother began, but I interrupted. I dare because it's true. Trevor has coasted his entire life on your support and excuses. I've built everything myself with no help from you, and instead of being proud of me, you're punishing me for it. So make your choice, Mom. Come to my wedding and celebrate my happiness, or don't come and live with that decision. But stop pretending this is about me being selfish when it's really about you refusing to acknowledge that your daughter has built an exceptional life that doesn't require your approval or your presence. I hung up before she could respond, then sat in my quiet living room and cried, harder than I had cried since childhood. Harrison found me there when he came home from the hospital, immediately wrapping me in his arms and holding me while I sobbed out the entire conversation. "They're not coming to our wedding," I said between gasps. "They're actually choosing not to come because I won't make myself smaller for Trevor." Harrison held me tighter, his voice fierce when he spoke. "Then they don't deserve to be there. Cassandra, listen to me. Anyone who would miss your wedding for such a petty, manipulative reason doesn't deserve to witness you at your happiest. We're going to have an absolutely beautiful wedding, surrounded by people who actually love us. And your parents are going to have to live with the fact that they deliberately chose to miss one of the most important days of your life." Over the following days, my parents made their decision official. They returned the response card from our wedding invitation with the regretfully declines box checked. They left the space for a personal message completely blank, no explanation, no well wishes, just a cold rejection. I kept that card in my desk drawer, a tangible reminder of their choice, and found myself taking it out occasionally just to confirm I had not imagined this betrayal. Word spread through the extended family quickly. My Aunt Patricia called me sobbing, unable to comprehend how her sister could boycott her own daughter's wedding. My cousin Jerome called my parents directly and told them they were making a terrible mistake they would regret for the rest of their lives. Several other relatives reached out to express their confusion and disappointment with my parents' decision. My mother apparently responded to these interventions with a carefully crafted narrative that portrayed me as the villain. She told people I had uninvited my parents after they had raised reasonable concerns about my extravagant wedding plans. She positioned herself as the wounded mother whose ungrateful daughter had excluded her from the wedding out of spite. Several relatives called me to ask about this version of events, and I calmly provided the truth, that I had invited my parents, that they had chosen not to attend because they demanded I make my wedding smaller to avoid overshadowing Trevor's, and that I had refused to diminish my wedding to accommodate their favoritism. Without exception, the relatives who called me expressed support for my position and assured me they would be attending my wedding regardless of my parents' absence. My Aunt Patricia, in particular, became an unexpected source of strength during this period. And she called me several times weekly, offering emotional support and practical help. When she learned that my father would not be walking me down the aisle, she immediately volunteered to take his place. "I would be honored beyond words to escort you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've watched you grow into an exceptional woman, and I've been heartbroken by how your parents have treated you. Please let me be there for you in this way." I accepted her offer gratefully, moved by her generosity and her consistent support throughout my life. Trevor called me once during this period, his voice uncertain. "Cassie, this is getting really out of hand. Mom and Dad are seriously not coming to your wedding. Can't you just, meet them halfway? Scale things back a little?" "This family is falling apart." "This family fell apart a long time ago, Trevor. You were just too comfortable being the favorite to notice, and I'm not scaling anything back. I'm having the wedding Harrison and I planned, and Mom and Dad are choosing not to attend. That's their decision, and they'll have to live with it." "But, Trevor, have you ever once in your entire life stood up for me? Have you ever told Mom and Dad they were being unfair? Have you ever acknowledged that they've treated us differently?" Silence. "That's what I thought. You've benefited from their favoritism your whole life, and you're not willing to risk that by supporting me. So don't call me asking me to compromise. You and Mom and Dad created this situation. You can all deal with the consequences." I hung up, blocked his number, and focused my energy on the people who were actually supporting me through this painful period. My wedding day arrived on a perfect October afternoon. The Miami weather cooperated beautifully, sunny but not oppressively hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of ocean salt and flowers. The Grand Aurora Hotel looked absolutely spectacular, transformed into the elegant wonderland I had spent months planning. Standing in the bridal suite that morning, surrounded by Julia, my bridesmaids, and Dorothy, I experienced a complicated swirl of emotions. The dress fit perfectly, the hair and makeup were flawless, every detail was exactly as I had envisioned. But the absence of my parents created a void that no amount of perfect planning could fill. Julia caught me staring at my reflection, with tears threatening to spill. "Don't you dare ruin that makeup," she said firmly, moving to stand beside me. "Cassandra, you look absolutely breathtaking. This is your day. Your parents made their choice, and it's a choice they're going to regret for the rest of their lives. But you don't get to let their absence diminish your joy. Harrison is downstairs waiting to marry you, and approximately 150 people who genuinely love you are waiting to celebrate. Focus on that." Dorothy appeared on my other side, squeezing my hand. "You are the most beautiful bride I've ever seen, and more importantly, you're one of the strongest women I know. The fact that you're standing here, about to marry my son, despite everything your parents have put you through, that's extraordinary. They don't deserve to witness this, Cassandra. But everyone downstairs does, including you and Harrison." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. They were right. This was my wedding day, the beginning of my marriage to the man I loved more than I had believed it was possible to love another person. My parents' absence was their loss, not mine. The ceremony was breathtakingly beautiful. I walked down the aisle on Aunt Patricia's arm, her eyes wet with proud tears, toward Harrison, who stood at the altar looking devastated in the best possible way. The moment our eyes met, everything else fell away. The absent parents, the family drama, all the pain of the preceding months. There was only Harrison, only us, only this moment where we promised to build a life together. We had written our own vows, and when I spoke mine, promising to be his partner through every triumph and every challenge, to support his dreams while building our own, I meant every word with my entire soul. When Harrison promised to always be my biggest champion, to love me exactly as I was, without ever asking me to diminish myself, I felt tears stream down my face. He knew. He understood what I needed to hear, especially on this day when my parents' absence shouted their message that I had always been too much, too successful, too unwilling to shrink myself for others' comfort. The reception was everything I had dreamed of and more. The ballroom looked magical, illuminated by hundreds of candles and the crystal chandeliers casting prisms of light across the space. The food was exceptional, each course carefully selected and perfectly executed. The band was incredible, transitioning seamlessly from dinner music to dancing. Harrison and I had our first dance to "The Way You Look Tonight," and I felt like I was floating in his arms. The traditional parent dances approached, and I felt a moment of panic. Harrison danced with Dorothy while I stood at the edge of the dance floor, smiling but aching. Then Harrison's father, William, appeared beside me. "I would be honored if you would allow me this dance," he said gently. "I know I'm not your father, but I hope you'll accept me as a stand-in for this moment." We danced while tears streamed down my face, and William told me that he and Dorothy considered me the daughter they had never had but had always wanted. "Your parents made a terrible mistake," he said quietly, "but their loss is our gain. You're part of our family now, Cassandra, and we will never take that for granted." The toasts were equally moving. Julia gave a speech that was both hilarious and heartfelt. recounting our college friendship and the moment she met Harrison and knew he was the one for me. Patrick, Harrison's best man, spoke about watching his best friend fall completely in love and how it had restored his faith in soulmates. Several of my work colleagues spoke about my professional accomplishments and my character, painting a picture of success and integrity that my parents had never acknowledged. Then Aunt Patricia stood up, unplanned, and requested the microphone. "I want to say something," she announced, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "I've known Cassandra since the day she was born. I've watched her grow into an exceptional woman, brilliant, kind, accomplished, and remarkably strong. Some people are missing from this celebration tonight. People who should be here, people who chose not to witness this joy. That's their loss and their shame, but their absence only makes the love in this room more apparent. Cassandra, you are surrounded by people who see you, who value you, who celebrate you exactly as you are. Welcome to the family, Harrison. You're getting the best person I know." The applause was thunderous, and I saw many people wiping away tears, including myself. As the evening continued, I found myself feeling genuinely deeply happy despite the conspicuous, empty chairs at the family table. This was my wedding, my celebration, my beginning with Harrison. My parents had chosen to exclude themselves from it, and that was their burden to carry, not mine. When Harrison and I left the reception that night in a shower of rose petals and sparklers, driving toward the hotel's penthouse suite for our wedding night, I looked back at the glowing ballroom windows one final time. The wedding had been everything I wanted: beautiful, meaningful, filled with love. But the shadow of my parents' deliberate absence lingered over every perfect moment, a constant reminder that the people who should have loved me unconditionally had instead chosen conditional approval and ultimately chosen not to be present at all. I did not regret my choices, but I mourned the parents I deserved and had never truly had. Harrison and I spent 2 gloriously indulgent weeks in Tuscany for our honeymoon, existing in a beautiful bubble where family drama and hurt feelings seemed impossibly distant. We stayed at a converted villa in the hills outside Florence, spending our days exploring medieval towns, visiting vineyards, and eating food that made us reconsider everything we thought we knew about cuisine. We would wake late each morning in our sun-drenched room, make love slowly without the rush of work schedules or obligations, then spend hours over breakfast on the terrace overlooking rolling hills covered in olive groves and grapevines. We visited museums and churches, marveling at centuries-old art and architecture. We took cooking classes and learned to make fresh pasta from an elderly Italian woman who spoke no English, but communicated through gestures and the universal language of good food. Most importantly, we talked. Long, rambling conversations about everything: our childhoods, our dreams for the future, the family we might build together, the careers we wanted to develop, the places we wanted to travel. Harrison asked me frequently during those 2 weeks if I was okay, if I was processing my parents' decision, if I needed to talk about the emotions I was experiencing. The truth was that being in Italy, far from Miami and all its associated drama, made the pain feel more manageable. Yes, my parents had boycotted my wedding. Yes, that hurt deeply. But I had married the love of my life in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by people who genuinely cared about us. I had stood in a ballroom full of love and commitment and celebration. That reality mattered more than my parents' absence, or at least I was trying very hard to believe that. We returned to Miami at the end of October, tanned and relaxed and deeply in love. We moved into the house we had purchased together several months earlier, a beautiful modern home in Coral Gables with clean lines, abundant windows, a pool in the backyard, and a garden that I was excited to cultivate. The house felt like a fresh start, a physical representation of the life we were building together that had nothing to do with our respective family histories. I returned to work energized and focused, immediately diving into the final stages of the arrhythmia drug launch that had been consuming much of my professional energy for the past year. My colleagues welcomed me back warmly, asking about the honeymoon and the wedding, admiring my ring, and expressing genuine happiness for this new chapter in my life. Harrison returned to his surgical practice and teaching responsibilities at the hospital, his schedule immediately filling with complex procedures and residents who needed mentoring. We developed a routine: early morning workouts together, long days in our respective careers, evenings where we tried to disconnect from work and focus on each other, weekends spent exploring Miami's neighborhoods or working on our new home. Life moved forward, and for a brief period I almost allowed myself to believe that the drama with my family was finished. My parents had made their choice, I had made mine, and we were all moving on with our lives. Then Trevor's wedding date began approaching, and everything exploded in ways I could never have predicted. I received Trevor and Sienna's wedding invitation in mid-November, forwarded from my old apartment address to my new home. The invitation was printed on cheap cardstock with generic fonts, nothing like the custom letterpress invitations Harrison and I had sent. The ceremony was scheduled for December 12th at 3 p.m., with location details to be provided closer to the date. The invitation included a registry link and a note requesting, "No boxed gifts, please, cash or checks preferred." I looked at the invitation for approximately 30 seconds before dropping it directly into the recycling bin. I had no intention of attending Trevor's wedding. He had not attended mine. My parents had chosen his feelings over my happiness repeatedly throughout my entire life, and most recently by boycotting my wedding. I owed none of them my presence, my support, or my congratulations. Julia called me that same evening. "Please tell me you're not actually considering going to Trevor's wedding." "I'm not considering it." I threw the invitation away approximately 10 minutes after it arrived. Good. After everything they've done, they have absolutely no right to expect you to show up and smile and pretend everything is fine. I have no interest in pretending anything. As far as I'm concerned, I no longer have a relationship with my parents or my brother. They made that decision when they boycotted my wedding. November passed peacefully. Harrison and I hosted Thanksgiving at our new home, inviting his family and the friends who had become my chosen family. We crammed 14 people around our dining room table, passing dishes and telling stories and laughing until our faces hurt. Dorothy helped me prepare the turkey, sharing her family recipe and techniques. William and Harrison's brother-in-law handled the bar, making elaborate cocktails and ensuring everyone's glass stayed full. Julia and Rebecca became fast friends, bonding over their shared love of reality television and their mutual protectiveness of me. As I surveyed the crowded, chaotic, love-filled room, I felt genuinely grateful. This was family. Not perfect people connected by genetics, but imperfect people connected by choice and genuine affection. My parents and Trevor were spending Thanksgiving together, just the three of them plus Sienna, and I felt no regret about my absence from that gathering. Then, during the first week of December, exactly 1 week before Trevor's wedding, my mother called. I almost did not answer when my mother's name appeared on my phone screen. Harrison and I were in the kitchen preparing dinner together, something we tried to do several nights each week despite our demanding schedules. He was chopping vegetables for stir-fry while I marinated chicken, and we were engaged in an animated debate about whether we should watch a documentary about deep-sea exploration or a comedy special after dinner. The phone rang 3 times before I picked up, wiping my hands on a dish towel and bracing myself for whatever this conversation would bring. Harrison glanced at me questioningly, and I mouthed "my mother" before answering. "Hello, Mother." Cassandra. Her voice sounded strained, higher-pitched than usual, lacking its typical commanding tone. "How are you? How was the honeymoon?" I felt anger flash through me. She was calling nearly 6 weeks after my wedding, asking about my honeymoon as though she had not deliberately missed the wedding itself. "I'm fine. The honeymoon was lovely. What do you want?" A pause, the sound of her carefully controlling her breathing. Can't a mother call her daughter just to check in? We haven't spoken since you boycotted my wedding because I refused to diminish it for Trevor's benefit. Yes, we haven't spoken since then, so I'll ask again. What do you want? Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, the false pleasantness had vanished entirely, replaced by barely controlled panic. We need to talk about Trevor's wedding. It's in 1 week and there's a serious situation. Everything is falling apart. What kind of situation? The words came rushing out. The venue fell through, the event coordinator quit, the caterer canceled. Sienna is having multiple breakdowns daily. Trevor is completely overwhelmed and paralyzed. The wedding is collapsing, and we don't know what to do. I turned off the stove burner under the chicken and gave my mother my full attention, though not for the reasons she probably hoped. That sounds terrible, but I'm not sure why you're calling me about it. Because we need your help. The desperation in her voice was palpable. You clearly know how to plan an elaborate wedding. You have connections with vendors and venues. We need you to help Trevor salvage his wedding day. The audacity was breathtaking. I actually laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that made Harrison look up in concern. You want me to help plan Trevor's wedding? The wedding that was supposed to be more important than mine? The wedding I was supposed to diminish my own celebration for? That wedding? This isn't about that ancient history, my mother said, though her voice lacked conviction. This is about family helping family in a crisis. You have the skills and resources to fix this situation. No, Mother. This is about you calling me only when you need something from me. You haven't spoken to me in 6 weeks. You missed my wedding. You sent no congratulations, no card, no acknowledgement that I got married. And now you want me to drop everything and rescue Trevor from the consequences of his own poor planning? He's your brother, Cassandra. Blood is blood. Despite your selfishness and your grudges, we're still your family. Family, I repeated slowly, tasting the word. Is that what you call people who boycott your wedding? People who demand you make yourself smaller for their comfort? People who have shown favoritism your entire life and refuse to acknowledge it? You're being dramatic and vindictive. I'm being honest, and the answer is no. I won't help Trevor with his wedding. He's an adult who had months to plan this event. The fact that it's falling apart is not my problem. If you don't help, my mother's voice turned cold and threatening, Trevor will have to cancel or postpone indefinitely. Sienna's family will be humiliated. Your father and I will be humiliated. Everyone we know will be asking questions. And there it was, the real concern. Not Trevor's happiness or Sienna's disappointment, but my parents' potential embarrassment in their social circles. Then I suppose you'll be humiliated, I said calmly. You've spent months bragging about Trevor's upcoming wedding, haven't you? Telling everyone how perfect it would be? And now you're panicking because people will discover it was all talk. Cassandra, I'm asking you as your mother to help your brother, please. No, you made your choice when you boycotted my wedding. Now you have to live with the consequences of that choice, just like I had to stand at my own wedding without my parents there. Good luck with Trevor's situation. I hope you figure it out. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline. Harrison had abandoned the vegetables and was watching me with a mixture of concern and pride. She actually asked you to save Trevor's wedding? After missing mine entirely. After months of demanding I make my wedding smaller. After refusing to even acknowledge that I got married. Yes, she actually asked. Harrison crossed the kitchen and pulled me into his arms. What do you want to do? I thought about it carefully. I want them to suffer. Is that terrible? It's human. They hurt you badly and now they're asking for favors. You don't owe them anything. They're going to make me the villain. They'll tell everyone that Trevor's wedding failed because his cruel sister refused to help. Let them. Anyone who matters knows the truth. I pulled back to look at him, an idea beginning to form. What if there was a way to make them understand exactly how I felt at my wedding? To make them experience the same disappointment and embarrassment they caused me? Harrison studied my face. What are you thinking? What if I offered to help? What if I acted like I had reconsidered, like I wanted to rebuild the family relationship? I could use my connections to arrange everything for Trevor's wedding. Venue, catering, flowers, all of it. They would be so relieved, so grateful. And then, at the last possible moment, I could cancel everything and leave them with nothing. The silence stretched between us as Harrison processed this. That's calculated. That's cold. They boycotted my wedding, Harrison. My mother tried to force me to diminish my celebration for Trevor's benefit. They've favored him my entire life while ignoring my accomplishments. Cold is what they've earned. I'm not judging you, Harrison said carefully. I'm making sure you've thought this through completely. Once you do this, there's no reconciliation. Your relationship with your parents and Trevor will be permanently destroyed. It's already destroyed. They destroyed it when they chose not to come to my wedding. I'm just making sure they fully understand the consequences of that choice. Harrison studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, what do you need from me? Support. Just be here and support me through this. Always. I spent that evening carefully crafting my approach. I would call my mother the next day, contrite and apologetic. I would say that her call had made me reflect on the importance of family relationships. I would offer to help with Trevor's wedding, using my vendor connections and planning expertise to salvage what I could in the limited time remaining. They would be so relieved, so grateful for my apparent change of heart, that they would not question my motives. And then, the night before Trevor's wedding, I would systematically cancel every arrangement I had made. The venue, the caterer, the florist, the photographer, the music, everything would disappear, leaving Trevor and Sienna with nothing. Just as my parents' absence had left a void at my own wedding, I would create a void in theirs. They would experience exactly what I had experienced. The crushing disappointment of having something important deliberately destroyed by people who were supposed to love you. It was vindictive. It was cruel. It was exactly what they deserved. The next morning, I called my mother. She answered immediately, her voice cautious. Cassandra. Mom, I want to apologize for how I reacted yesterday. I was caught off guard by your call, and I responded defensively. But I spent last night thinking about what you said, about family helping family. I don't want to be the reason Trevor's wedding is ruined. I want to help. The relief in her voice was immediate and overwhelming. Oh, Cassandra, thank you. Thank you so much. I knew you would come around. I knew that deep down you weren't as selfish as you've been acting. I gritted my teeth and forced warmth into my voice. What exactly does Trevor need? Over the next 90 minutes, my mother outlined the complete disaster that was Trevor's wedding planning. He and Sienna had spent the money my parents had given them for wedding expenses on other things. A new car for Sienna, a trip to Las Vegas, new furniture for their apartment. They had kept postponing vendor deposits, assuming they could handle everything at the last minute. By the time they actually tried to book services, most reputable vendors were already committed to other events or required deposits they could no longer afford. The venue they had tentatively reserved had released their date when they missed the deposit deadline. The caterer they wanted had booked another event. The photographer they liked was unavailable. They had done virtually nothing concrete except select a date and send invitations with details to follow. As my mother described this cascade of irresponsibility, I felt my resolve strengthen. Trevor had learned nothing from his years of failure. He was still expecting other people to bail him out of situations created by his own poor choices. My parents were still enabling him, still frantically trying to fix his disasters while expecting me to help after they had treated me so poorly. I'll see what I can do, I told my mother. I have some vendor contacts who might be able to help on short notice, but Mom, I need you to understand. I can only work with what's actually possible in a week. This won't be the elaborate wedding you originally envisioned. Anything you can do would be a miracle at this point, Cassandra. We're desperate. Let me make some calls. I'll update you this evening. I spent the remainder of that day contacting vendors I had worked with for my own wedding. The venue coordinator at a smaller hotel, a caterer who owed me a favor, a florist I had tipped generously, a photographer whose career I had helped promote. I explained that my brother was getting married in 1 week and needed emergency services due to unexpected venue issues. Most were sympathetic and willing to help, especially when I emphasized that I would personally handle all payments and deposits. By evening, I had assembled the framework of an actual wedding, a hotel ballroom that had experienced a last-minute cancellation and was available, a caterer willing to accommodate a 100-person event with a simplified menu, a florist who could create basic arrangements with available flowers rather than custom orders, a photographer with an opening in their schedule, a DJ service that had availability. It was not the elaborate event my parents had been envisioning, but it was legitimate and functional, exactly what Trevor and Sienna would have had if they had planned responsibly from the beginning. I called my mother and outlined everything I had arranged. Her gratitude was effusive and uncomfortable. "Cassandra, this is wonderful. I can't believe you pulled this together so quickly. You're saving Trevor's wedding." "I'm glad I could help, Mom. Family is important." "Your father and I have been talking, and we want you to know. We're ready to move past all the unpleasantness from your wedding situation. We want to rebuild our relationship with you and Harrison. We want to be a family again." I smiled, even though she could not see me. "I'd like that too, Mom. Families should be there for each other." Over the following 5 days, I became the wedding planner I had never wanted to be for Trevor. I finalized the menu with the caterer, adding selections I knew Sienna would like based on comments she had made months earlier. I worked with the florist to create arrangements that matched the simple elegance aesthetic Trevor and Sienna had vaguely described. I confirmed the timeline with the photographer and DJ, ensuring they understood the schedule for the ceremony and reception. I even found Sienna a decent wedding dress at a boutique that had sample sales, a simple but pretty gown that would work for a last-minute wedding. My mother called me multiple times daily, gushing about how amazing I was being, how she had always known I would come through for my family. My father sent me a long email thanking me for being the bigger person and expressing regret for the distance that had developed between us. Trevor called me crying, saying he knew he did not deserve my help after not attending my wedding, but he was overwhelmed with gratitude. Sienna sent me a gift basket filled with expensive candles and bath products, along with a card that said, "Best sister-in-law ever. Thank you for saving our day." I accepted all of this gratitude with false humility, assuring them that family was the most important thing, that I was happy to help, that I wanted nothing more than for Trevor and Sienna to have a beautiful wedding day. Harrison watched this performance with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You're very convincing," he said on Thursday evening as I confirmed final details with the venue coordinator. "I learned from the best. My parents have been performing their version of a loving family for years. I'm just returning the favor. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Once you cancel everything tomorrow night, there's no undoing it." I thought about my wedding day, the empty chairs where my parents should have sat, the father-daughter dance that never happened, the mother who should have helped me into my dress but chose not to be there, the casual cruelty of their absence, the deliberate choice to miss one of the most important days of my life because I had refused to diminish myself for Trevor's benefit. I'm certain they need to understand what they did. They need to experience the same disappointment they caused me. By Friday afternoon, everything was in place. The venue was reserved and paid for with my credit card. The caterer had confirmed the menu and the timeline. The florist had the arrangements prepared. The photographer and DJ had the address and schedule. Sienna had her dress. Trevor had arranged for a friend to officiate the ceremony. All the guests had received updated information about the location. Everything was perfect, and tomorrow night it would all disappear. I drafted an email Friday evening, carefully crafting each word. It was brief and to the point. To Mom, Dad, Trevor, and Sienna, I regret to inform you that I have canceled all arrangements I made for tomorrow's wedding. There is no venue, no catering, no flowers, no photography, and no music. These cancellations were deliberately made as a consequence for the choices you made regarding my own wedding. You demanded I diminish my wedding to avoid overshadowing Trevor. When I refused, you boycotted my ceremony and showed no remorse. Instead of apologizing, you expected me to rescue Trevor from his own irresponsibility. I wanted you to experience what I experienced, the disappointment of having something important destroyed by people who are supposed to love you. Consider this a lesson in consequences. Do not contact me again. We are no longer family. Cassandra. I scheduled the email to send at 8 a.m. Saturday morning, exactly 7 hours before the wedding was supposed to begin. Then I turned off my phone, closed my laptop, and went to bed beside my husband, feeling more powerful and more at peace than I had felt in months. Harrison and I slept in Saturday morning, a luxury we rarely afforded ourselves. We made a leisurely breakfast together, fresh squeezed orange juice, French toast with berries, perfectly crispy bacon, and ate on our back patio while reading the newspaper. The December morning was mild and beautiful, the kind of perfect Florida winter day that reminded you why people moved to Miami. At exactly 8 a.m., my scheduled email sent simultaneously to my parents, Trevor and Sienna. I imagined them reading it, the confusion, the panic, the dawning realization that every arrangement they thought was in place had been deliberately destroyed. I imagined my mother frantically calling the venue only to be told the reservation had been canceled late yesterday. I imagined Trevor desperately contacting the caterer and being informed that Ms. Harrington had canceled the order and forfeited the deposit. I turned my phone back on at 9:02 a.m. The notifications were immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of missed calls, furious voicemails, text messages that ranged from pleading to threatening. I poured another cup of coffee and systematically read through them all, feeling a strange sense of detachment, as though I were reading about someone else's family drama rather than my own. My mother's voicemails were barely coherent, her voice raised to near screaming levels. She called me evil, vindictive, cruel, heartless. She said I had destroyed my brother's life out of jealousy. She said she would never forgive me, that I was dead to her, that she had no daughter. My father's messages were quieter but equally angry. He said I had gone too far, that this was beyond acceptable, that my actions were unforgivable. He said I was no daughter of his and that I should never contact them again. Trevor's messages followed a progression. The early ones were panicked, begging me to tell him this was a joke, that I had not really canceled everything. As the morning progressed and the reality became undeniable, his messages turned angry. He called me names I had never heard him use. He said I was jealous and petty, and that everyone had always been right about me being selfish. His final message, left at noon, said simply, "I hope you're happy now. You got what you wanted, I have nothing." Sienna's messages were mostly incoherent, crying with occasional accusations that I had deliberately ruined her life. I listened to every message, read every text, and felt nothing but satisfaction. They wanted me to feel guilty, to regret my actions, to beg for forgiveness. Instead, I felt liberated. I had taken back power that they had denied me my entire life. I had refused to be diminished, refused to rescue them from consequences, refused to continue participating in a family dynamic that required me to make myself smaller for everyone else's comfort. Julia called at 1:00 p.m., laughing so hard she could barely speak. "Cassie, please tell me the rumors are true. Please tell me you actually did it." "I did it." "You're my hero. I'm serious. What you did was epic, legendary. They're going to tell stories about this revenge for years. They're probably telling stories about what a monster I am. Who cares? You stood up for yourself. You showed them that actions have consequences. That's not monstrous, that's justice. Aunt Patricia called shortly after, her voice grave. Cassandra, I heard what happened. Your mother called me, absolutely hysterical. She said you sabotaged Trevor's wedding. I did. Good. I smiled despite myself. You think so? I think your parents have treated you abominably your entire life. I think they favored Trevor constantly while ignoring your genuine accomplishments. I think they boycotted your wedding for absolutely inexcusable reasons. And I think sometimes people need to learn lessons the hard way. This was their hard lesson. Mom said I'm dead to her. Your mother says a lot of dramatic things when she's angry. But Cassandra, even if she means it, even if they never speak to you again, you'll be fine. You have Harrison, you have friends who love you, you have a career you've built through your own merit. You don't need people in your life who only value you when you're useful to them. We talked for another 20 minutes, and Aunt Patricia's support helped reinforce that I had made the right choice, however brutal it might have been. The rest of Saturday passed quietly. Harrison and I went to the beach, walked along the shore holding hands, watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere across the city, Trevor and Sienna were dealing with the wreckage of their non-wedding. Somewhere my parents were facing the consequences of their favoritism and their cruelty. And I was free of the obligation to diminish myself, free of the expectation that I would endlessly sacrifice for a brother who had never appreciated it, free of parents who had never valued me. The following week, I learned through Aunt Patricia about my family's desperate attempts to salvage something. My parents scrambled to arrange a last-minute ceremony at a local public park, calling in every favor they had and throwing together whatever they could manage with zero notice and extremely limited resources. They purchased basic decorations from a party supply store, ordered sheet cakes from a grocery store bakery, and asked Trevor's friend with a nice camera to take photos. Only about 30 people attended, mostly immediate family members who felt obligated and a few of Sienna's closest friends. The ceremony was conducted under a park gazebo by the same friend who was taking photos, using vows they found on the internet. The reception consisted of folding tables, store-bought food, and a portable speaker playing a Spotify playlist. Photos surfaced on social media over the following days, and they told the story clearly. Sienna looked disappointed and uncomfortable in her boutique sample dress. Trevor appeared stressed and embarrassed. My parents looked exhausted and humiliated. The entire event had the energy of something thrown together at the absolute last minute by people completely overwhelmed by circumstances they had not anticipated. It was exactly the kind of modest, thrown-together, mediocre wedding they had wanted me to have. The irony was almost poetic. My mother sent me one final email 2 weeks after the wedding disaster. It was not an apology. Instead, it was a cold, formal message informing me that she and my father were removing me from their will and considering me no longer part of the family. They would not be contacting me again and expected the same courtesy from me. Any future family gatherings would not include me. I was, in her words, dead to them. I replied with a single word, agreed. Harrison worried that I would eventually regret my actions, that the satisfaction would fade and leave only guilt and remorse. But months passed, and the regret never materialized. Instead, I felt progressively lighter, unburdened by the constant need to prove myself to people who would never acknowledge my worth. I threw myself into my career with renewed energy. The arrhythmia drug launch I had been managing became one of the most successful in our company's history, achieving market penetration that exceeded even our most optimistic projections. My leadership on the project was recognized with a significant promotion to Vice President of Pharmaceutical Marketing, along with a substantial salary increase and expanded responsibilities. I was 33 years old and leading marketing strategy for a division that generated hundreds of millions in annual revenue. Harrison's career flourished as well. He pioneered a new minimally invasive cardiac surgical technique that significantly reduced patient recovery time and complication rates. He published multiple papers in prestigious medical journals, presented his findings at international conferences, and was recruited by other hospitals with offers of department leadership positions. He chose to stay at his current hospital, negotiating instead for resources to expand his research program. Together, we built a life that felt authentically ours. We purchased a vacation home in the Florida Keys, a small beachfront property where we could escape on long weekends and holidays. We traveled extensively, taking trips to Japan, New Zealand, Morocco, and Iceland. We developed a close circle of friends who shared our interests and values. We hosted dinner parties at our home, filling our space with laughter and conversation and genuine connection. We also began seriously discussing starting a family. Harrison wanted children and had been open about that from early in our relationship. I'd always imagined becoming a mother someday, but my own complicated relationship with my parents made me hesitate. What if I inherited their capacity for favoritism? What if I repeated their patterns of conditional love? Harrison listened to these fears patiently, then reminded me of something crucial. I had spent my entire life deliberately not becoming my parents. I had built different values, different priorities, different ways of relating to people. My awareness of their failures would make me a better parent, not a worse one. Aunt Patricia remained in contact, providing occasional updates about family developments despite my explicit lack of interest. Trevor and Sienna's marriage struggled almost immediately. Sienna resented Trevor for the disaster wedding that had resulted from his poor planning, conveniently forgetting that she had been equally irresponsible with money and planning. Trevor remained chronically underemployed, bouncing between part-time jobs and claiming he was still finding his path at 31 years old. They fought constantly about money, about ambition, about whose fault various failures were. My parents, according to Aunt Patricia, had become somewhat isolated in their social circles. The story of Trevor's wedding disaster had spread, and while my mother tried to paint me as the villain, too many people had witnessed their behavior at my wedding, or rather their deliberate absence from my wedding, to fully buy that narrative. People asked uncomfortable questions about why the parents would miss their daughter's wedding, and my mother's evasive non-answers only made the situation more awkward. Trevor and Sienna had a daughter when I was 35, a baby girl they named Madison. My parents apparently became devoted grandparents, posting constant photos on social media and babysitting frequently. Aunt Patricia showed me some of these photos once, asking if I felt anything seeing my parents with their granddaughter. I looked at the images, my parents cooing over a baby, my father holding her gently, my mother smiling in a way I rarely remembered her smiling at me, and felt absolutely nothing. No longing, no regret, no jealousy. That baby was a stranger, born into a family I no longer belonged to and had no desire to rejoin. I'm happy for them, I told Aunt Patricia honestly. I hope they're better grandparents than they were parents, but it's not my concern. Harrison and I welcomed our first child when I was 36, a son we named James William, incorporating Harrison's father's name as a middle name to honor the man who had stood in for my absent father at our wedding. Holding James for the first time, feeling his tiny weight in my arms, I experienced a fierce protective love that was almost overwhelming. I understood in that moment that I would never, ever treat this child the way my parents had treated me. He would always know he was valued, celebrated, and loved unconditionally. We had 2 more children over the following years, another son named Oliver and a daughter named Claire. Our home filled with the beautiful chaos of childhood, toys scattered across living room floors, finger paintings displayed on the refrigerator, Bedtime stories and goodnight kisses, skinned knees that needed bandaging, and childhood disappointments that required comforting. I became the mother I had always needed, present, attentive, fair, and unwavering in my support. When James excelled academically, I celebrated his achievements. When Oliver struggled with reading, I hired tutors and worked with him patiently every evening until his skills improved. When Claire showed talent in art, I enrolled her in classes and displayed her work prominently throughout our home. I loved them equally but individually, recognizing their unique personalities and needs. Harrison was an exceptional father, patient, playful, consistently present despite his demanding career. He coached James's soccer team, built elaborate Lego structures with Oliver, and attended every one of Claire's art shows. Our children grew up understanding that both their parents valued them, that achievement was celebrated, but love was never conditional, that family meant showing up consistently and reliably. When I was 41 years old, 9 years after my wedding, 9 years after the calculated destruction of Trevor's wedding, 9 years of building a life entirely separate from my birth family, I ran into my father at a medical conference in Chicago. I was attending because my pharmaceutical company was unveiling several new cardiac medications, and I was delivering a keynote presentation about pharmaceutical marketing in the digital age. Harrison was also attending, presenting his latest research on minimally invasive surgical techniques. We had left our 3 children with Harrison's parents in Miami, treating the Chicago trip as a rare opportunity for adult time together. I was walking through the conference hotel lobby, reviewing notes on my phone for my presentation later that day, when I heard someone say my name. Cassandra? I looked up and saw my father standing approximately 10 feet away, looking older and grayer than I remembered. He had retired from his accounting firm the previous year, according to Aunt Patricia, but apparently still attended medical conferences due to some consultancy work he was doing. His hair had gone predominantly gray, and there were new lines around his eyes and mouth that made him look tired. For a moment, we simply stared at each other across the hotel lobby. 9 years of silence and separation compressed into a single awkward moment. Other conference attendees flowed around us, talking animatedly about research presentations and pharmaceutical innovations, oblivious to the complicated history between the two people standing frozen in their path. Finally, my father approached slowly, hesitantly. "Cassandra, hello." "Dad." My voice was neutral, carefully controlled. "You look well, happy." He seemed genuinely surprised by this observation, as though he had expected the years of estrangement to have destroyed me. "I am happy, very happy. I saw that Harrison is presenting today. His work on minimally invasive techniques is groundbreaking. The surgical community is very excited about his innovations. He's brilliant. I'm very proud of him." Awkward silence stretched between us. Conference attendees continued swirling around us, and I became aware that we were creating an obstruction in the lobby. I gestured toward a quieter seating area, and we moved there almost automatically. "I heard you had children," my father said after we sat down. "3 of them?" "Yes. James is 8, Oliver is 6, and Claire just turned 4. "That's wonderful. Congratulations." He paused, then added quietly, "Trevor and Sienna had another baby last year, a son. They're divorced now, sharing custody." Aunt Patricia mentioned the divorce. "I'm sorry it didn't work out." I meant it sincerely, not because I felt particular sympathy for Trevor, but because divorce was painful and complicated, especially with children involved. "Trevor's struggling," my father continued, seemingly unable to stop himself from sharing. "He's moved back in with us. He's 40 years old and living in his childhood bedroom, working part-time at a gym and paying child support for 2 children. Sienna remarried already. A doctor, actually, someone stable and responsible. Trevor resents that." I absorbed this information without comment. Trevor had become exactly what his life trajectory had always suggested. A middle-aged man unable to support himself, still dependent on our parents, still facing consequences of his chronic irresponsibility. Your mother and I, my father began, then paused, seeming to struggle with the words. We made terrible mistakes. With you, with how we treated you, with the favoritism we showed Trevor. We destroyed our relationship with our daughter because we couldn't see past our own biases. Yes, you did. He flinched slightly at my blunt agreement, but I saw no reason to soften the truth. I came here today to apologize, he continued, not because I expect forgiveness or reconciliation, but because you deserve to hear it. We were wrong. About everything. We demanded you diminish yourself for Trevor's benefit. We boycotted your wedding. We enabled Trevor's irresponsibility while ignoring your genuine accomplishments. And we drove away the child who actually succeeded, who actually built a remarkable life. I'm sorry, Cassandra. I'm profoundly, deeply sorry. I studied my father carefully, looking for signs of manipulation or ulterior motive. What I saw instead was genuine remorse, the weariness of someone who had spent years living with the consequences of their choices and had finally recognized their mistakes. Thank you for saying that, I said quietly. I appreciate the apology. Does it change anything? The question hung between us. I thought about it seriously, really considered whether this apology, years overdue but seemingly genuine, altered my feelings about my family. No, I said finally. I forgive you, Dad. I genuinely do. Carrying anger and resentment doesn't serve me, and I've let go of most of that over the years. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. You and Mom showed me very clearly who you were and what I could expect from you. You chose Trevor over me repeatedly for 3 decades. You boycotted my wedding. Mom tried to sabotage my career. Those were your choices, and they had permanent consequences. You destroyed Trevor's wedding in retaliation. That had permanent consequences, too. Yes, it did, and I don't regret it. You needed to understand what you did to me, to experience the same disappointment and embarrassment you caused. Maybe it was vindictive, but it was also justice. My father nodded slowly. Your mother still won't acknowledge any wrongdoing. She still insists you were cruel and unjustified. She still tells people you're the villain in this story. I'm sure she does. That's her prerogative. But I don't need her validation or her version of events to know my own truth. Can I ask you something? My father said after a moment. Are you happy? Genuinely happy? I thought about my life. My successful career, my loving husband, my 3 beautiful children, my home filled with laughter and warmth, my chosen family of friends and supportive relatives, the peace I felt having set boundaries with toxic people. Yes, I'm genuinely, deeply happy. My life is exactly what I wanted it to be, and I built it entirely on my own terms without compromising myself for anyone else's comfort. I'm glad. His voice was thick with emotion. I'm glad you found happiness despite us. You deserved parents who celebrated you, and we failed at that fundamental responsibility. But I'm proud of you, Cassandra, even if I have no right to be. Even if my pride means nothing to you now, I'm proud of the person you've become. Thank you. That actually does mean something to me. We sat in silence for another moment, and I realized this was probably goodbye. Not the angry, dramatic goodbye of 9 years ago, but a quieter, more final farewell between 2 people who had once been family but had diverged onto completely separate paths. I should go, I said, standing. I have a presentation to prepare for. My father stood as well. I saw you're doing the keynote on digital pharmaceutical marketing. I'm sure it will be exceptional. Thank you. We stood there for an awkward moment, neither of us sure how to end this encounter. Finally, my father extended his hand. I shook it, the gesture formal and distant, but not unkind. Goodbye, Dad. Goodbye, Cassandra. I hope your life continues to be everything you want it to be. I walked away from him, heading toward the conference hall where my presentation would take place, and felt an unexpected sense of closure. My father's apology did not erase the decades of favoritism and the pain of my wedding day without parents, but it acknowledged a truth he had spent years denying, and there was value in that acknowledgement, even if it did not change our relationship status. Harrison found me backstage before my presentation, immediately sensing something had shifted. "Are you okay? You look different." I ran into my father. He apologized for everything, the favoritism, missing the wedding, all of it. "How do you feel?" "Strangely peaceful. The apology doesn't change anything, but it confirms that I was right all along. My perception of how they treated me wasn't distorted or dramatic. It was accurate, and that validation from him, even years too late, actually helps." Harrison pulled me into a hug. "You're extraordinary. You know that, right? I'm just someone who refused to keep accepting unacceptable treatment." "Exactly. Extraordinary." My presentation went brilliantly. I spoke to a room of several hundred pharmaceutical marketing professionals about strategies for digital engagement, patient education, and navigating the complex regulatory environment of pharmaceutical advertising. The presentation was well received, generating multiple job offers afterward from companies trying to recruit me away from my current role. I declined them all politely. I was happy where I was, having negotiated an executive compensation package that reflected my value and my contributions. That evening, Harrison and I had dinner at an exceptional restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan. We talked about our children, our careers, our plans for the future. We discussed whether we wanted a fourth child or if our family felt complete at 5. We debated whether we should build a custom home or continue renovating our current house. We planned our next international trip, possibly Portugal or maybe returning to Italy. We never discussed my father or my birth family. They were no longer relevant to the life I was actively building and living. I am now 45 years old, sitting in my home office and reflecting on the path that brought me here. Through the window, I can see my 3 children playing in the pool. James teaching Oliver some swimming technique while Claire practices diving off the side. Harrison is grilling dinner on the patio, occasionally glancing at the kids to ensure they're safe while managing steaks and vegetables. This is my life now, built deliberately, consciously, from the ground up. Every element reflects choices I made, values I established, boundaries I enforced. I am the Executive Vice President of Global Pharmaceutical Marketing at one of the most respected companies in the industry, leading strategy for a portfolio that generates billions in annual revenue. Harrison is the Chief of Cardiac Surgery at his hospital, having declined numerous offers to lead programs at more prestigious institutions because we love our life in Miami. Our children are thriving. James is excelling academically and considering early admission to a specialized science program. Oliver has discovered a passion for music and plays 3 instruments. Claire shows remarkable artistic talent and has had her work displayed in local children's art exhibitions. More importantly, all 3 know they are loved unconditionally, that our support for them will never waver, that they never need to diminish themselves to make anyone else comfortable. My relationship with my parents remains non-existent. I have not spoken to them since that brief encounter with my father 4 years ago. Aunt Patricia continues providing occasional updates despite my lack of interest. My mother has apparently softened slightly, occasionally mentioning to relatives that she wishes she could meet her other grandchildren. But she has never apologized, never acknowledged her role in our estrangement, never taken responsibility for her choices. So the distance remains permanent. Trevor, at 44, still lives with my parents. He works intermittently at various jobs that never last, pays child support irregularly, and remains dependent on our parents for housing and financial support. His children, now teenagers, spend most of their time with Sienna and her successful physician husband, who provides the stability Trevor never could. From what Aunt Patricia tells me, Trevor has become bitter and resentful, blaming everyone but himself for how his life has turned out. I feel no satisfaction in Trevor's struggles, but also no guilt. His life trajectory was established by decades of poor choices enabled by our parents. My refusal to continue rescuing him was not what caused his failures. It simply meant he had to face consequences without someone swooping in to fix everything. Looking back on the decision to systematically destroy Trevor's wedding, arguably the most vindictive action I've ever taken, I still feel no regret. Was it cruel? Yes. Was it disproportionate? Perhaps. But it was also the clearest communication I could offer about consequences, about boundaries, about the price of treating people as disposable. My parents needed to understand what they had done to me. They needed to experience the disappointment and embarrassment they had caused. Words had never worked. Years of conversations, explanations, and expressed hurt had been dismissed or minimized. So I communicated through action, and the message was finally received, even if it was never truly understood. The question people ask me occasionally, usually friends who know some version of this story, is whether I would do anything differently if I could revisit those years. My answer is always the same. I would set boundaries much earlier. I would stop seeking approval from people constitutionally incapable of providing it. I would recognize sooner that some relationships, even family relationships, are fundamentally toxic and need to be ended rather than endlessly repaired. But I would still refuse to diminish my wedding. I would still refuse to rescue Trevor from his irresponsibility. And yes, I would still systematically destroy the arrangements I made for his wedding to teach a lesson about consequences. Because some lessons can only be learned through experience, and some relationships can only be salvaged by ending them. I have built an extraordinary life. Successful career, loving marriage, beautiful children, genuine friendships, financial security, personal fulfillment. I built it entirely on my own terms, without compromising myself for other people's comfort. And the absence of my parents from this life, painful as it once was, has become simply a fact rather than a wound. They made their choice when they boycotted my wedding. I made mine when I refused to continue accepting unacceptable treatment. We all live with those choices now, and I have no desire to revisit or revise them. Julia called me yesterday asking if I would be willing to mentor a young woman she knows, a pharmaceutical marketing professional in her 20s whose family treats her dismissively despite her obvious talent and success. Julia thought maybe I could offer perspective and encouragement. I agreed immediately, because if my story has value beyond my own healing, it is this. You do not owe diminished versions of yourself to anyone, even family. You do not have to accept conditional love and call it unconditional. You do not have to rescue people from consequences they have earned. And you do not have to keep people in your life simply because you share genetic material. The people who deserve your time, energy, and love are the people who actually see you, value you, celebrate you, and show up consistently and reliably. Everyone else, regardless of their title or relationship or history, is optional. I learned that lesson at great cost and through significant pain, but learning it freed me to build a life that feels authentic, joyful, and entirely mine. And that freedom was worth every difficult moment it required.